Welcome to the Payment Strategy Show. I'm Brooke Smith. This show is brought to you by Rainforest, the payment provider purpose-built for vertical software platforms to help you process more payments volume at higher margin with a payments product your customers love to use. I'm here today with Emmy Keshler and Kyle Scott. Both Emmy and Kyle have a huge amount of experience supporting a payments product at vertical software companies. Emmy and Kyle, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm happy to be here, Brooke.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brooke.
How did you get into vertical SaaS and fintech?
Honestly, I just needed a way to pay for rent when I was in college. And sure enough, I asked my random roommate's mother for an internship. And that ended up being for a direct to merchant ISO or payments ISO. 8 years later, I found myself with experience in implementing merchant accounts, supporting them, and even took a stab at selling them for a period of time. What's funny, when I was trying to sell payment accounts direct to merchants, I would cold call a merchant and try to undercut the pricing from the current provider. One of the recurring themes I kept noticing is that merchants didn't seem to care as much about saving money on their payment processing if their payments were provided by their software provider. And so they seem to care more about the value they got out of their software. That experience led me to working for a couple of SaaS companies. And then most recently, I got to be a part of one of those SaaS companies building a payments offering successfully. So payments and SaaS has become my career path ever since.
I love it. We hear from a lot of both SaaS operators and consultants is that we overestimate how much merchants actually care about a few basis points when there's so much more value in saving time, getting rid of the headaches, and having a one-stop solution. Emmy, what about you?
Not a unique story for me. Just like so many others in payments, I fell in. It was a total accident. I didn't know what I was signing up for. But now I'm a payments lifer and I can never leave. But I fell into payments after working in some adjacent fields, finance and legal. And then I found my way to a healthcare SaaS company who was just scaling their support for payment operations. Once I saw how impactful payment ops is for a company, I have been addicted and I've been part of different verticals ever since. So I spent the next few years of my life, more than a few, but in different verticals. So I hopped over to the gig economy, working with influencer and contractor payments, and then to a vendor management platform, and then to veterinary health before I ended up at Rainforest.
Amazing. Question for both of you. What are the biggest operational challenges at a vertical software company when you have embedded David payments?
I can kick us off here. Ultimately, I think you want your payments offering to feel like a natural extension of your software. If an event happens in the payment processing side, you want your software to recognize that event and update records accordingly. I think about an example, and maybe your software provides an invoicing solution and a payment made against one of those invoices is disputed. Well, you want to make sure that your invoice is updated accordingly so that it's open again, right? That customer still owes you funds. And so your clients are relying on your software to be a system of record. So ultimately, I think it's about ensuring you select a payment provider that allows your software to speak to every event in the payments lifecycle. It's really crucial. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in a vicious cycle of constantly answering support requests about how to update the software to account for those events in the payment lifecycle manually. So I think it's all about really embedding and making payments feel like a natural extension of your software.
Absolutely. And Emmy, what were some of the biggest challenges you found day to day?
Running different operations teams, I found that they can very easily get siloed in a company. I've seen payment ops teams get put under support or CX or finance or revenue or business development. Really, they're just anywhere that has a little bit of space, and companies don't really know how to nurture that function. So, because payment operations is such a niche, it can feel kind of like an island of misfit toys, especially because payments can become this black box of mystery and magic to people who are not in it every day, which means other teams and people might avoid or not know when to bring payments into the conversation. So that's where they get siloed and just get lost in the bigger picture. So the consequence is it's harder to get company buy-in. When you're limited in how much you're talking about payments, you're limited in how much you're actually getting out of that service that you're supporting when it is becoming so table stakes in today's economy. So here I would say internal education goes a long way. That is how you eventually trickle down to a simpler end user experience.
When it comes to nurturing that payment operations function, what does best in class look like?
That you can only get there if you have somebody who's really advocating for your payment operations. It could be a payments leader. It could be the leader overseeing the payments. It could be a individual contributor, but you have to have somebody who is advocating internally for that education, for the product enhancements, moving away from manual processes that payment teams can really get bogged down on. It's constantly seeking a better, more efficient operational way of doing things. And well supported operations teams often are making compelling business cases. So your best in class payment ops teams, they're probably good internal salespeople where they're making compelling business cases to the product teams, to other teams, putting themselves at the table when those other teams might not think to bring you into the conversations. Just having better visibility across the organization comes from having that internal advocate.
What does that business case look like? Are you talking to revenue, retention, cost reduction? What are some examples?
A lot of times it's going to be ARR. So you are going to be talking to finance or revenue. How payment ops is contributing directly to ARR isn't always obvious, but it is definitely always there. There could be strategic initiatives where the software is moving into a new corner of your vertical, or you're going after a different ICP and you need some different features to serve that side of your vertical. If you are talking about customer retention, maintaining that ARR or boosting it, your operations team can contribute to CSAT scores or NPS scores or collecting the social proof for your case study. Whatever it is, you need to speak the language of the direction where your company is going strategically. So pay attention to your company-wide KPIs and the overall vision. Payment operations is always a big part of that.
Emmy, what payments lesson did you learn the hard way? Something that in retrospect was totally preventable, but the experience made you a much more knowledgeable payments professional.
Yes, I will not forget this because it did lead to 6-7 figure losses for the company. You have to standardize your risk monitoring, standardize your standards, you could say. You can't scale with subjective processes when it comes to risk. I had an experience at one point, which has since become drastically more sophisticated, so don't go looking for it. But the software's risk monitoring policy was largely based on judgment calls by individual people like me. And there was nothing codified that I could point to say, policy X says this is a red flag, or anything in writing, really. The risk monitoring was mostly just a lot of spidey senses, and this feels off evaluations, which obviously doesn't scale if you have more than one person on the team or a lot of volume that you have to pay attention to in real time. So the 6 to 7 figure losses that I mentioned, they did happen because of personal opinions that were different over the legitimacy of some activity that we had on our platform. And no platform should ever take on that kind of liability.
Yeah. I feel like there's a meme opportunity here about like risk management on Vibes.
Yes.
So, and Kyle, what was yours? What was your like really hard earned payments lesson?
I'll echo the risk theme here, but more on the underwriting side. Obviously every merchant account needs to be underwritten, and what I've seen is for the most part, the questions a merchant needs to answer for the underwriting application, they're pretty standard across processors, right? What we learned the hard way is that some processors will sell you on instant onboarding, real-time approvals, instant approvals, but ultimately that instant approval is just a partial underwriting. And so essentially, once they start processing, your processor is going to reach out to you and say, hey, we need more financials now that they're actually processing some volume. So it requires you to go back to the merchant, ask for updated financials, whatever it may be. And it just creates friction with the merchant. And so underwrite your merchants entirely from the beginning. Leave them alone, let them process. Don't pester them for financial statements 2 months after the fact. It's just never a good experience.
Not at all. And I feel like that's a conversation that we have with platforms all the time because there's so much hype around instant onboarding. But Joshua said on a previous episode, and he got it right, the only people who really benefit from instant onboarding are fraudsters.
Mm.
Everyone else is so much better off getting fully underwritten upfront so that they can actually like get paid.
Couldn't agree more. The last thing you want is an outbound campaign to re-underwrite half of your accounts. So get ahead of it from the beginning.
Yeah, it's a terrible experience for everyone. And speaking of experience, in talking with a lot of software companies, I feel like there's this sense of inevitability about payments being hard to support. It's so fatalistic. No matter what we do, this is going to be burdensome and it's going to be terrible. So either we should just use a referral-based payment partner and offload all of the support burden to them, or we just have to accept that this is going to be terrible and expensive and miserable for everyone. To what degree is that true? And to what degree can software companies actually make a huge difference in making support more efficient at a reasonable cost while being a great experience for everyone?
I don't think it really matters if you're supporting merchant accounts from the ISO lens, so a direct to merchant, processor relationship, or with a SaaS company. I've handled support requests in both fields, and ultimately they're all the same requests. You really can bucket the types of requests you're going to get around payments. Merchants are going to have questions about chargebacks, about reconciliation. Maybe they need to update their bank account. And that's just to name a few. If anything, you can provide an even higher level of support as the SaaS company. You can easily learn talk tracks around the common payments questions. You can build guides around this. But if you can also support the questions around their payments, how that interacts with your software, that's one less company a merchant has to reach out to for support, and ultimately a happier customer. So ultimately, I think it's a little easier at a SaaS company, if you ask me.
Yeah. Emmy, what was your experience?
I'm chuckling a little bit because I have been this person at a software that said, I know we need to have payments. We just don't know how. So we'll put it in somewhere. And they put it in somewhere without a whole lot of thought. And it is grueling when it's bad. So I get it. There is some degree of truth. If you're not thoughtfully implementing payments, it is probably going to hurt. I think the biggest reason that softwares end up there is because they're not taking payments seriously. They see supporting payments as a cost center. So this calls back to my strong opinion that you need to have an advocate for payments internally. There is no title like head of payments or GM of payments or payment ops manager, magician, what have you, that can solve this for you. Advocacy is the quality that you have to have somewhere supporting your payments program. That advocate is probably going to be your payments leader that breathes and dreams in payments. They will be able to talk with product and talk with sales and talk with CSMs and sell them first on the value of payments. And once you've educated the company on how embedded payments are table stakes in the economy, you'll have the buy-in that you need to invest in the right tools, because payment support is hard when everything is very manual and everything feels one-off and you're just kind of piecemealing this solution together and you haven't brought in those high quality, well thought out tools where you're automating. You have those FAQs that Kyle was mentioning, those guides to support your customers, so you get less time spent with confused customers when you're able to orient them right out of the gate. And overall investing in that operational efficiency is you have to have it. So having a well-rounded team that understands the role that payments are playing in your company, and not just, hey, we have to have it somewhere, and it doesn't live with just one sole payments SME. It's a company mindset. That is how you get out of that rut.
One thing that you hinted at, and I want to dive into it a little bit more, is the idea that if the payments implementation is haphazard, like the result is exactly what you expect. It's going to be terrible for everyone. It's going to be hard to support. It's going to be expensive to support. Everyone's going to be miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And if the payments implementation is very thoughtful and intentional, then it's going to be a lot easier to support payments. And I think part of this gets back to something Kyle mentioned earlier, which is payments events need to be able to drive software platform events and vice versa to keep all of the data synced. And you can know, if an invoice is paid, this is what it means for the project. What are some other examples of the difference between a thoughtful implementation versus a haphazard implementation?
Ultimately, I think you just want your payments to feel like a natural extension of your software. At the end of the day, it's a utility. And merchants don't really care who they're processing with. They're really focused on the value they're getting out of your product. And so if your payments offering doesn't fit seamlessly into your software offering, it's just going to result in operational challenges, increased support requests, things like that, really making it feel like that natural extension of your software and implementing it right from the beginning. It's going to drive value for your merchants, but also just give them a more frictionless experience at the end of the day. If you're implementing a complex business management system, for example, you want to ensure that when the merchant goes live with your software, they also go live with your payments offering at the same time. So get ahead of the payments underwriting so that you can focus on the platform implementation. Maybe your merchant requires a token migration. Ensure you work on that in parallel with their platform onboarding. So you have time to request the tokens and map the tokens. When they go live with your software, maybe there's a recurring model here and they're expecting to be able to auto charge all of their customers on that go live date. The last thing you want is for a merchant to be ready for go live on the platform, but still be waiting for tokens from their previous provider. Or what if that previous provider won't release the tokens? It's all about getting ahead of the payments onboarding for me and giving yourself time to maneuver in situations like that. And even as far as the application goes, I mean, merchants may start the application, they may stop to go find a piece of data. We'll send them a slight nudge a couple days after they haven't finished the application, right? Be proactive with the onboarding. Don't just let it sit, fall to the wayside, and focus on the software implementation. When they get ready to go live, if they haven't finished that application, they're not going to be able to take payments from their customers. And well, that's not going to be a happy merchant at the end of the day.
It's true. And even though merchant onboarding is, we hope a one-time event for every merchant, it's a huge source of support tickets, questions back and forth between the merchant and the software platform and the payment provider. And it really sets the tone for that whole relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Emmy, you had originally brought up thoughtful implementation versus let's just bolt it on implementation. What does that difference look like in practice?
The bolted on concept is kind of funny, and I know it comes from softwares knowing that they just need payment somewhere, but they still have really high expectations. A lot of softwares are expecting millions of dollars of ARR, and there are just very few services out there that have the same high expectations with kind of a low offsetting investment. So having a thoughtful implementation is the first step to getting you what you want out of payments. It's choosing the right partner that can support all of the different payment flows that you want to provide your merchants. It's having that partnership with your payment provider, going into it knowing what the onboarding is going to be like, because as Kyle was talking about, it is such a big introduction to what your service is going to be like when your merchants are working with your software. It's just being thoughtful about the whole experience from start to finish, taking it seriously internally at your software, having payments education across the org so the different teams know how payments is going to come up in their conversations and how they can help prepare the merchants and your customers, setting the right expectations and knowing how payments is actually going to help them in the end. That piece and having part of payments as part of all of the conversations across the org makes it feel more cohesive, and that can only get there with some advocacy and thoughtfulness internally.
It's always amazing to me how strong the mythology is of just add payments and double your revenue. Because as people who have been around payments and software for a little while, we know that the difference between the SaaS companies that actually double their revenue and the ones that don't is how thoughtful and intentional they were about the payments implementation.
Yes.
So true.
So, Emmy, you mentioned choosing the right payment provider for your use case and your needs. How does the choice of payment provider actually filter through to that day-to-day operational experience? I feel like there's a common misconception that the payment provider is totally behind the scenes, so we should just choose the cheapest one because we're going to build all of these layers of product above it, and then we're going to have all our layers of support and operations. The payment provider doesn't matter.
The payment provider that you pick is empowering you And you can only serve your customers as well as your payment provider can support you. If you are left feeling confused and in the dark, you will not be able to support your customers in an efficient way. So you need that good partnership with your payment provider. You need to know that they are going to like the consultant and advisor role. Like, hey, what do I do with this situation? The payment provider needs to help you strategize and pivot where you need it, and really think through how you're going to serve your customers' needs. Additionally, how they're supporting you matters a lot. You need to know that your payment provider, one, knows what's going on, and two, is going to communicate with you about what's going on. You don't want a payment provider that's just going to be a black box of magic and mystery. You want to know that they've got it. And since every vertical is very different, you need to make sure that your payment provider can get there with you, because there are going to be some pretty unique use cases out there that different verticals are going to need. So you could have one merchant that is heavily reliant on ACH. In that case, you need a payment processor that can do that securely with low friction. Then you can have another merchant, even in the same vertical, that is sustained on card volume. Then you're counting basis points of interchange and how that can really take a big slice of pie from your software or your merchant if you're not optimizing. So you need a well-rounded payment processor that is going to be that advisor to you and ask the questions that you didn't think to ask. So definitely make sure that you feel comfortable with your payment provider being able to answer anything that you throw at them.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of these vertical specific payment provider issues are things that aren't even obvious until the platform has been using that payment provider for several months.
Mhm.
Like things that you wouldn't even think of in advance. I talked to a platform recently that their merchants were all managed services professionals who invoiced their business customers on the first of the month. So they had a huge volume of payments the first couple days of the month. And their payment provider was always flagging it as fraudulent every single month, even though it was very predictable and supported by documentation and totally normal for their industry. And that's the kind of thing that the platform couldn't possibly anticipate because, like, who thinks that a payment provider is going to flag something that's totally routine and normal for the industry? Whereas a payment provider that actually looks at the risk profile independently for every platform is going to know this spike in volume the first couple of days is normal. Little things like that make a huge difference. And then, Kyle, what's your experience been? How does the payment provider indirectly make ops either way harder or way easier?
It's all about selecting a provider that offers the endpoints for you to really speak to each portion of the payments lifecycle. Again, I mean, your software should update records accordingly based on these events that happen in payment processing. Yeah, I mean, ensure you pick a provider that allows you to speak to each of those endpoints. An example would be maybe your software provides a deposit report for your merchants. Your merchants are going to rely on that report to reconcile those bank deposits in their general ledger. But if that report doesn't total correctly, say perhaps a chargeback is included in that deposit report, or maybe a flag transaction's included in that deposit. It's crucial to pick a provider that allows you to report on the actual details of what makes up those deposits. Or you're going to find yourself in this vicious cycle of constant support of merchants asking, well, why doesn't this deposit total correctly? So pick a provider that gives you that flexibility from the beginning. And that way you don't ever face a situation where you have to uproot all of your merchants and switch them to a better provider that gives you that functionality.
Yeah, that's a really good call out because we talk a lot about how the sort of role model payments implementation is going to be deeply embedded. It's going to be part of the core workflows. But in reality, in order to do that well, the payment provider needs to make that data programmatically available. The data needs to be accurate and the data needs to be timely, which sounds really simple talking about it together, but I think we all have been in payments long enough to know that it's not something we can take for granted.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when selecting a provider, think about the value that you want to provide your customers or your merchants out of your software, and then pick a provider that allows you to build that solution around that value proposition.
In the veterinary vertical, our software was centralized around caring for the caretakers. And at the end of the shift in that veterinary hospital, they were batching out what did I collect in cash, what did I collect in card payments. And if that number was off and they couldn't reconcile, they couldn't go home. So now your 10-hour shift is an 11-hour shift, and you just kind of want to go home and get rested for the next day. So it is not a small thing to be able to reconcile at the end of the day. It's not just for back office people, it does affect the whole organization that you're serving.
Absolutely, especially with SMBs where, everyone is involved in every part of the business. So I have a hypothesis. And of course, this might just be me because I'm a millennial and I will not pick up the phone if I don't have to. But I feel like there's a disconnect between what companies think they need to offer for support and what people actually want. Companies think about support and they're like, we need to make it fast. We need to have a short time to first response. We want to have the shortest time to resolution possible. And yeah, those are important. But what people really want is to not need support in the first place. I would much rather have everything just work so that I don't have to pick up the phone. Then, of course, if I do need to pick up the phone, yes, I want it to be fast and I want them to be able to respond the first time. I don't want it to be like a half a day ordeal with my bank needing to talk to 4 different people to fix one error that they created. Is this valid, or am I just a millennial who hates getting on the phone? And how can software companies create this experience where people don't even need support that much because the product just works?
Well, Brooke, with me, you are seen and you are heard because I am a fellow millennial. So I'm extra honored to be on a call with you talking about that, about payments, and totally agree with you. It has to just work. Even better than having responsive support is not needing support at all. And the way that you get there is you have to stress test the wheels off the payment flows before it even gets into the live environment. So if you put it to work before you put it into production. So I'll give you a little anecdote here. I've done this in a past life. I worked in a vertical that was 85 to 90% card present processing, where we were big on hardware. And we were using a processor that was not rainforest. A lot of our support requests centered around the hardware, not surprisingly, since that was essentially the face of our service. And for a lot of reasons, we got those support requests around the terminals. And I would say that in general, the hardware that we had didn't function on a level fit for the 20th century of smart devices. We had a hard time getting diagnostics from the processor. So I didn't have the answers to be able to support the merchants and our customers like I wanted to. So I went to go get some answers by putting myself in the merchant's shoes, and thus began my stress test of our wireless terminals. And I ended up running like $100 worth of test transactions. I did test transactions in parts of my house that were running at 740 megabits per second. Then I tried at 400. Then I tried at 200. Then speeds at 150 and lower. I tried metal cards versus plastic versus mobile wallets versus dipping versus contactless payments. I tried Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and Amex, and I looked at how all of the descriptors appeared in each of those bank apps, because different bank apps can just surface information differently, and I wanted to understand where those questions were coming from. I simulated car side payments by taping my card to the top of a terminal, and I walked that terminal out to my driveway, and I initiated the payment from the software inside my house, and then I tried test payments with one wall and then 2 walls between me and the router, because in a in-person environment, you probably have some distance between you and your routing setup, wireless router setup. You just want to see like where the breaking point is. And I timed all of it. I timed the seconds it took to initiate and populate payment in the software. I tracked decline rates. I tracked error rates. I even took my terminal out to a coffee shop and stress tested it where there was a ton of network traffic, a lot of people sitting on their phones, and how did that interrupt all of the processing. So long story short with that is you have to stress test it. Some common or creative environments where your merchants will be processing, it will work if you do all the bug squashing ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, I just go back to my previous point of ensuring that your software updates accordingly, based on payments events. A couple of other things you can do is you can cover these payment events in the actual implementation with the merchant themselves. Ensure they're educated from the beginning on how to actually process a payment, how to issue a refund, or how to respond to a chargeback. Show them how to reconcile, their deposits using your software. Set them up for success at the beginning. At the end of the day, you won't make money as a SaaS company with payments if your merchants don't know how to actually process payments in your system. I've seen it
Mhm.
before all too often. A SaaS company will sign a merchant, they'll connect a gateway, and then send the merchant on their way. But educate them from the beginning. It's going to set them up for success, cut down on those support requests in the future, right? And maybe you have a more self-service model. Well, I go back to ensuring you have guides and documentation, even tooltips around how to successfully process payments in your software.
One thing that I think is really cool is that both of your responses had this same undercurrent of understand what merchants need to do and how. And this is both physically accepting payments, but then also in the software, like what do they need to do and see and know and understand? And then make sure those things work and stress test them and try to break them from every angle so that you know what the limitations are, you can document it, and you can communicate to merchants exactly what to expect.
Couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
Final wrap-up question for you both. But like, what are the operational best practices? Like, if you had to distill all of your experience in wisdom into just one piece of advice or a set of best practices for vertical software companies supporting payments, what would it be?
For me, I think it's all about being proactive with payments during the implementation, right? No merchant's going to get excited to complete an underwriting application. They get excited to implement your platform. So guide them through that underwriting process, even nudge them through the process if you have to, and get through that so that they can focus on the platform implementation itself. From the support lens, I think it's also about being proactive. At the end of the day, you're handling another business's money. And they probably won't care about payment processing until that money doesn't show up in their account when they're expecting it to. So be proactive, pick up the phone, call them if a deposit gets flagged for review, or maybe a large chargeback occurs. At the least, ensure there's some type of automation to notify the merchant when those events occur. At the end of the day, they're going to be far happier that you reached out to them to make them aware and position yourself as a resource to help them through this situation than if they just log into their bank account and see, a deposit or money missing and they have to call you. I can't emphasize enough about how much being proactive is important when working with, a payments offering.
I completely agree. You have to be proactive. Nobody I've ever worked with has said, "Hey, stop giving us payment updates. I don't care what's going on back there," as if you could ever say too much. And I would add on that you should start removing should from your operations vocabulary. That is now your S word. I would never say to a customer, "It should work," because that's not confidence inspiring. And it doesn't make them feel like you know what's really going on with their money. I never let my payment processing partner get a case of the shoulds either. If a payment provider tells me that something should or should not happen, I do push back. I hold them accountable. How do we know that it should happen? What if it doesn't? What are we going to do? You do need to have an action plan if you're getting a case of the shoulds and you just aren't sure. So as a software company, your customers will be holding you accountable for how things are working. So get ahead with your payment processing partner. You should have done an exhausting amount of testing and stress testing and collaborating with your payment processor to understand the ins and outs of what works. So you never have to say it should work. You know that it will.
I'm going to be so hyper aware of every time I say should now.
You're going to have to put a dollar in the should jar.
I will probably be taking that should money out for dinner. Any closing thoughts? Anything we missed?
At the end of the day, even as a software provider, you're really earning your merchant's business one transaction at a time. Be hyper aware of anytime there's a situation with a single transaction, right? Be proactive, make the merchant aware. At the end of the day, it's a utility and they're expecting it to work. There's a level of support you can provide around payments that it's just going to create that much more of a sticky relationship with that account. So yeah, it's a great offering if positioned correctly and you build an operations department around it that works properly.
Mhm. I would say make sure the payment processor is sweating the small stuff. Never let a penny go out in the Bermuda Triangle of we don't know what happened to this reconciliation. You have to demand answers from your payment processing partner and know that they've got it so that you can actually support your customers with real answers and give them guidance on how to navigate this new embedded payments trends that we've got going on.
That is so true. If a penny can get lost in the Bermuda Triangle, like $100,000 can get lost in the Bermuda
Mhm.
Triangle.
Exactly.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me. This was an awesome episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Brooke. Thank you so much.